Hi everyone, thank you very much for coming, and we are live on the stream as well, so we are going to be about 25 minutes. We are going to talk for about 20, and hopefully we will leave about 5 minutes at the end. I'm delighted to be in Perugia again, but I'm more delighted to actually be here with Louise. Louise is somebody who is probably one of the most important people in digital sector, somebody who has been in New York Times during the time when the famous innovation report was written, and Wall Street Journal, and how we got together in terms of our connection. And I'm just delighted that we meet for the first time, and we're also going to speak to you today. I think it's also really important to say that whilst, I'm Dmitry, by the way, I'm working for the BBC before, but been a consultant before, but I now have a new job running a media operation for a Swiss media conglomerate. One thing which I need to be quite clear about is that we're not talking about AI and regulation, AI and guidelines, AI and kind of open AI discussions, negotiation. We're not talking about that. We're talking about practical things of how to do AI in newsrooms. How do you start? How do you not start? All of that type of stuff, okay? So, and it's an open conversation, so please leave the questions to the end. Let's start.
Thrilled also to be here with Dmitry, who has been an inspiration to me and pointed the roadmap to a lot of things that we did at the Wall Street Journal in particular around user needs, which we'll talk about. But just to dive in, Dmitry, you have a new job. You're a CEO at Ringier, and as you come into a new company and you look around with fresh eyes, you've got a lot of things to deal with. So how are you prioritizing an AI roadmap? Is it a big piece of your work, a little piece?
It's a piece that is always there, and so Ringier is a company that has a lot of Swiss presence, of course, and I'm not touching Swiss at all because I'm not working with Swiss market, but my job is called CEO Ringier Media International, so I am in charge of all non-Swiss media operation for Ringier. And of course, if you are a CEO and all of the countries have their own CEOs and I'm guiding them, and my job is to figure out how we can leverage access to us being a multinational organization and what kind of things we can do together in terms of AI, whether we can bring technology to people so they don't need to think about it and we can actually leverage the fact that we can negotiate on their behalf, and also we can learn from one country and immediately make it available in another country. And that is a really big thing for me. I did a lot of similar work for the BBC when I was at the BBC at World Service, where we kind of create once and then distribute it 40 times, for example. And I think that AI will be able to help us tremendously here. So my main work will be educational, hearts and minds, so to speak, because if another person asks me about whether journalists will be lost to robots, like it's such a boring question, right? It's not about that at all. It's about calming people down, easing people's nerves around the system, because everybody is nervous, but actually you don't need to be. And I'm actually extremely excited about this, but there is a process to implement any technology, right? So,
absolutely.
So that is quite interesting, and because we can play in so many interesting areas of AI which journalists can be excited about, and my job is to basically show them how they can be excited about this, and we can learn together, you know. So, and one of the things which we initially, as I mentioned at the start of the conversation, when the innovation news report was published or was leaked to BuzzFeed and then created by New York Times, Louise was one of the people who worked on it. And I was really interested myself. If you were to write another innovation report right now, how would you approach AI? How would you even think about this overall? And I'm not talking about kind of big things about, you know, like big things, philosophical things. I'm actually a very practical guy, so I'm actually interested in practical advice. What would you say?
Yeah, well, it's a 10-year anniversary of the innovation report leaking is actually this month. And in fact, those of us who worked on it are having our first ever reunion on I think May 13th, so it'll be really interesting to talk with the group. We're all different places about what we think now, and I know AI will be a big part of the conversation. I agree with Dmitry. It's not about whether we're going to use AI in news. It's about how we're going to do it. And it's not a black and white conversation. There's a lot of things in the middle. So just to go back and say, if we're going to do another innovation report at the New York Times, I have done other innovation reports at the Wall Street Journal. I led a big content review there also. And if I were going to do one today, first of all, let's just say, what did the innovation report do that was relevant to AI? Because in fact, we weren't talking about AI then, but we were talking about data then. And AI is part of the data era. This is not like there was nothing happening around AI 2 years ago and now it's happening. This has actually been very gradual and evolving. And it really started earlier in the 2000s when we started as a society just collecting data on everything and building up all these data repositories. And actually one of my first beats as a reporter at the New York Times was to cover the advertising industry. And we did this study with ComScore in 2008 where we looked at data points that companies were collecting online, and it really struck me the number of data touch points the technology companies had in 2007 where they were grabbing things about you as you went around their site. We plotted on a graphic, Yahoo's over here and Google's over here, and then the New York Times and media companies, NBC, are over here. And so all this data's been collected. We're on a continuum. We're in the data era. And the innovation report from the New York Times really talked about how to use data about your audience to do audience development, right? And so audience development became a much bigger practice after the New York Times and others highlighted it. And at the Times, we created a department, and a lot of places created audience development departments. And so you're using data to see what does your audience want, and then you're taking stories and giving a story in a box to those audience members. And that's what audience development has really been, right? I think that AI now, in this part of the data era, in the AI part, we will shift to doing content development. So content development will keep audience development. You'll be looking at what do audiences want, but now you'll start changing the content. So instead of just taking whatever content you're doing in a box, and of course people adapted content already, like looking what was trending on search, but you didn't change stories within the story in the era of audience development, right? You just gave them the story you had and gave them the one that audience would like. Now I think with generative AI and how we can scale content creation, it will be content development.
I think it's just so important because I think we as industry can be so inundated or so fixated on using the technology for the sake of using technology. But actually, my biggest message back to editorial teams is just try to answer the question why you exist in the market. Mm-hmm. Like why you exist in the market, because nobody's asking people why you need to pay for Netflix or for Spotify, right? But the question, it's not very evident why people need to pay for news. We as industry have not proven that we are playing a crucial part in people's lives, and that is why AI can help. And I think that even with my new job, and I have been only 3 months in this new job, I started with just returning to basics. So data lake or data cleanliness of the organization, what kind of things, structures, what kind of people you have, because you can't, everybody's asking what kind of structure you need to put into AI and what kind of people you need to hire and the rest. But actually before that, you need to say, is the balance right between journalists and audience/content developers, for example, because it's, if you can have 100 journalists and you are light on other supporting roles, your journalism can never be impactful. It just cannot be impactful. And I will go even further, and it's a controversial way of saying things, but I'm quite direct and I always will say it. You have 10 journalists in your organization. Maybe you need to have 9 journalists in your organization and spend a 10th salary on making sure that your surrounding tooling and support is actually adequate, because otherwise 10 people can never be as effective as 9 people surrounded by all of that help.
So I agree with all those points, and Dmitry, I just want to say how I really got pulled into your work. So when I was at the Wall Street Journal, we did another type of report. It was called the content review, like the innovation report at the New York Times. And at that time, when I was at the Wall Street Journal, I was one of the top masthead editors running all the coverage, but I was also simultaneously the chief product and technology officer. So I have this tech and content outlook. And we came across some work that Dmitry had led at the BBC. And people in product are always thinking about user needs, but people in content don't really. But his work captured, and I thought it was spot on, that you can think of user needs in content. So we made that a big part of our content review and strategy at the Wall Street Journal. It was very effective. And I just wonder if you can elaborate on what user needs have been and what you think they will be in this next phase of the data era.
So if you haven't heard about user needs, I don't know where you have been in the last 10 years. So it's a really important piece of work, and if your newsrooms don't use it or utilize it, then they are not as effective as they can be. And when Louise shared some decks and that is, we're talking maybe 2020, 2021 or something like that. So
Yeah,
she showed some
2020.
decks
Yeah.
with me with Wall Street Journal indexing all of its output, not only based on topics, but based on user needs. I literally started laughing from joy, or maybe crying, because it was just so important for me. Not only the BBC was doing it, but then Wall Street Journal, it's a big organization, then Condé Nast started doing it with Vogue, and then Atlantic started doing it, and then everybody else. So basically, it's about something is happening in the world, and you have a choice of covering it in a particular way. And there are 6-8 very specific ways of covering it, and it's up to you to figure it out. And AI now is going to be enabling it in a much bigger way, not only with the help of the editorial kind of using AI as a co-pilot to run some ideas past it. So for example, something is happening and say, I want to write an educate me story, what kind of things I need to put in that article to make sure that it is as educational as possible. And AI can tell you, well, you are actually missing X point A, Y, whatever, X, Y, Z. And then the same thing, same thing, same thing. So basically, when I talked about cleanliness of data, that includes correct tagging, correct taxonomy, including user needs, because then AI can really take your editorial thinking to the next level. And without that thinking, you will never be able to succeed, because then people in the past basically were only analyzing content based on topics. So business does better than entertainment. Very rudimentary, right? Then you start saying, well, actually, then you start adding formats into that, and you say, well, actually, a business story created as a first-person account does better than a business story as a write-up, for example. Now you are able to say, well, actually, a business story created as a first-person account in an educate me user need form, user need lens does 6 times better than another permutation, right? And then suddenly you kind of go much deeper into what your audience really needs, right? And I'm just really interested in this area so much because the user needs have been so influential, because you're not telling people to do something else. You're still saying them, do whatever journalism you want to do, but do it better. Mm-hmm. Do it more effectively. Did you find it the same thing? Like, well,
it's
what
very
was your
effective.
experience?
I mean, you will get more traffic and more conversions on stories if your journalists and editors are cognizant of what user need they're trying to serve, because it'll affect the structure of the story, the tone of the story, the distribution plan. So that awareness will change your newsroom. I just want to add on, though, in this era, now that we have AI, in the data era, one thing I think is really exciting is we could have a multiplicity of user needs. So not just 6 or 8, because I think user needs are very powerful, but I do have one frustration with them, as they've been heretofore, which is they are user needs, user singular. But you know we don't have one user. We have users, and we have communities, and we have different users have different needs. So the one frustration while implementing them that I've had is you say, okay, serve this user's need. Well, who is the user? And there's a lot of different users. But heretofore, in journalism, pretty much you have one version of every story. And so that's meant that even though on the internet you can reach people all different ways and you can know who you reach, news organizations give everyone the same story. So they have to kind of go to the middle case study, kind of the average of who is their user. So I think a really fruitful area and something that we will see as we do content development is you can start developing different content for different users, because with generative AI over time, if you know about your audience, you can have a base story. But for example, let's say, I'll think in my Wall Street Journal hat, what should you do to save for retirement? Well, depends who you are, depends how old you are, depends what, right? So you can see that story, what should you do to save for retirement, with generative AI should have maybe portions of the story that are different for 50 different scenarios. No human being, we don't have the resources in news, could write that many versions. And so what I think is so exciting about user needs is I think they can become users' needs and become so many more. And
it's very interesting because, I also have a lot of examples of how people call it differently. They call it audience motivations, or they call it modes, or it doesn't really matter. It's all the same thing. The issue here is that imagine you come to work as a newsroom editor, and in the past everybody will be reading from the same planning document, and everybody will say, well, this is what is happening today. Boring, everybody can do it, everybody should come to the meeting having read this, to be honest, right? Don't spend your time on something that everybody can read before. But imagine if you are an editor of business and you come to work and you're bringing AI suggested story ideas based on what your audience really loved yesterday. So you will say, something has happened yesterday. You are going to still be doing that story today because that's what we do. We follow up and whatever. And then AI will know different audiences' reactions. So you'll say, actually, for a newsletter, you need to write an educate me story on that subject. But actually, for social media, you need to write an inspire me story for that subject. And then you will say, and you come to work and you already say, actually, you can disagree as an editor, you can disagree with AI, but frankly speaking, like if you can compute faster than computers, well, good luck to you. But what I'm saying is that because we're not leaving, I'm not saying, well, stop writing about business, start writing about Kardashians, right? I'm saying write about business, but as Louise said, every story probably will be offered in a multiple versions of ways every day. And this is really important because if you don't do it, if you don't capture your data, so what we said right from the start, the quality of data is important, right? Point number one, hiring people who understand what they're doing, and different types of people and competencies probably will be recommendation number 2. And number 3 will be about that point about why you exist in the market and what kind of angle you would want to take on a story would be 3rd.
And all this will be changing, right? So one of the tendencies that people in our industry have is to not really want to change what we're doing, right? And it's interesting to me, but not surprising, that a lot of the conversation about AI has been, how can we use it to keep creating the same product, but do it more cheaply, right? Like everyone talking about AI is just, could it replace writers to make these same stories that we've been writing even back from when we were print products? And I think that's lazy thinking, okay? I mean, sure, where there can be some tools that assist people to make things quicker, great, you know? But I think thinking, what are the new things that we could do with AI that we haven't been able to do? Like different versions of stories or all kinds of things. And then also, let's not forget, as AI spreads on the internet, it's going to change the way human beings interact with products. It's going to change our brains to some degree. It's going to change our tolerance for things. So we should not assume that people even want the same product that we had in the newspaper or we had in these early days of the internet. They're going to want something different. And one hypothesis I have is that people are going to want more answers. Direct, straight answers. And this will be, you'll have to think about how does your news org create answers from a technical standpoint that are structured so they're picked up by the platforms. But more interesting also will be the cultural changes, right? So as journalists, as reporters, as editors, we pride ourselves on giving this point of view, that point of view, the pro, the con, the he said, she said, and leaving it up to readers or to viewers to make up their own mind. But my hypothesis is that I think more and more as other products in the general internet just gives people answers that people are going to have for many topics, maybe not all topics, but for many topics, people are going to have less tolerance for reading through this long thing to figure out, well, who do I agree with? They're going to want to just know what's the answer. And so you'll want to think culturally in your newsroom, how are you doing things to also help people embrace the new needs, desires, and expectations of the public?
It would be so interesting to understand what the new user needs come
Yes.
out of all of this, because frankly speaking, apart from obvious things that we all already do, automated translation, automated summarization, whatever, bullet points, all of that. Like, okay, it's really nice and everybody has done it, not everybody, but a lot of people have done it, but I think it's still more of the same. It's still helpful and useful or whatever. We actually are probably, I don't know, a couple of years from really understanding how AI, what kind of products AI can help journalists create. We don't know. I'm a little bit suspicious about AI bots. I'll tell you a story. A few years ago at the BBC, we launched a BBC Mundo Facebook bot when Facebook started to allow to create bots for Facebook. It was a big internal thing. Oh, wow, BBC has created an internal bot and everything, and nobody cared. Like the audience really didn't interact with it at all. So I don't know. I think it's a little bit like, remember that very famous calculation that out of 100% of the audience, 10% read the comments, 1% leave the comments or something like that. So I wonder if the same paradigm will be applied to AI applications, because Rasmus recently wrote an article about ecosystem of news and how AI will be influencing the ecosystem of news. And the really important point he made is that media has a big role to play to actually like create this take-up or they inform people that this is possible, that it was possible, that is possible. And I don't think that we yet are in the process of figuring it out. Maybe we are, but we still haven't figured it out. So you always will need to have people who have done new things in the past, and please, please, please always have those people in your newsrooms, like hire people who have done some new untested things in the past, because you cannot deliver new things without those people, like who can manage the uncertainty.
Yeah, I'll just add on that, and then we'll take some questions. It's early days, but I think when you're thinking about what should your newsroom do for new things, always go back to your core competencies. You know, news companies are not technology companies, so I don't really think a lot of news companies are going to develop an AI model from scratch. They'll probably build on top of pre-trained models. But what do news organizations do well? News organizations have people who can verify information, for example. You know, is there a new product on that? Is there a B2B product? So go to your core competencies. We'd love to take questions.
Please. So if you haven't heard the question is about the internet being flooded by the automated generated content. I think the most important thing that any newsroom, which I started this panel with, is to figure out its reason to exist. And if you can answer that question, and I always will, when I was a consultant, I always would give that task to the C-level group of people, give them 10 empty pieces of paper and ask them to write a mission statement of their organization. I can guarantee you that those mission statements will be different in majority of cases. If your C-level people cannot describe your organization in the same sentence, that's already a problem, right? Forget about AI, like you don't understand your reason to existence. So I think that the most important thing, the niche you go, the better you will be. That's point number one. I really worry about generalist organizations, and I think that a lot of generalist organizations are going to struggle. But the niche you are, and my ambition would be to make generalist just a collection of niches, which are going to be different. I'll give you one example. I was just analyzing one of my titles for user needs work. And they have one particular area that they invest a lot of money in called smart cities. So they cover smart cities on a regular basis. Once you analyze your content according to user needs, you realize that help me articles around smart cities are doing 4 times better than update me articles about smart cities. So the question is not only about being clear about your niche, but being clear about how you cover that niche. And I think that that gets me excited about this, actually.
I'll just add on to that in terms of garbage around the internet. I think it will be garbage around the internet if there's no original reporting. You know, I have very strong concerns about people just using generative AI to scrape around the web and just repackage it into stories. And so I actually think we could be going into a heyday for original reporting. And I'm a reporter by heart. I still report. I just finished writing a book. I have bookmarks on the table if you want one. Totally different topic. But I love the fact that I think with AI, it's going to make original reporting that actually gets new information more valuable. And that's how you'll stand out in this era. You may use some AI for creating some of the story or making different versions of the story, but at the heart, you'll have new info.
Hi, both of you. So all the AI thing is basically try to replicate the brain, the human brain, right? So the evolution is neural network, etc. Neuroscience has been very good into getting into the marketing field and to the content, political content science also. Don't you think that it's time to have neuroscience editors in newsrooms?
Great idea.
Great question. anything to do with neuroscience, and I'm talking here kind of knowing it because my wife just qualified as a neurocoach. So, but like, and every time somebody says that amygdala is a limbic brain, she basically like wants to jump from what's the kind of, she doesn't like it because it's a very outdated way of thinking about amygdala. It's not your flight or fight center. It's a very different, but it used to be like that 10 years ago and 20 years ago, but nobody knows that actually science has moved on. So it's a great idea, theoretically. I think that when Louise talks about content development, maybe behaviorists need to be part of that squad. So like all media newsrooms need to start moving to squad working when you have a designer, a developer, and whatever, maybe behaviorist or maybe like psychologist, but the question is whether they're going to be trained with the latest news or with an outdated news.
And I would just say also it depends on, in a big picture way, news orgs have to make a decision. Are you going to do a deal with an OpenAI or an Anthropic and essentially license and use their models? Or are you going to invest in building, you will not build a model from scratch, but you might go on Hugging Face, you might get a pre-trained model, but then you would need to come up with the right weights that you need. And so if you're going to go down that more doing some of your own technology, yeah, you need neuroscientists and you, of course, need AI experts, and so it depends your path. There's one in the back here. Yes.
I think no, we don't have time.
No, please come talk to us up here, and as we head out, and I put cards here with my email address. I'm happy to engage with anyone. I'm sure Dmitry is
thank you very much for being so engaged. Thank you.
Thank you.